Okay, so continuing our discussions about Native Instruments Absynth, today I really want to continue with the other oscillator modes that you have built into all of your oscillators that we could add here. But the first that we've already seen was called single mode. In other words, what Absynth is going to do is just play this shape once repeatedly. So when I play a note on the keyboard, let's just play one note. There it is, there's your middle C. It's just going to do that shape over and over again, and that's it, end of story. You already saw how we could activate Hertz mode and change the frequency that way, or put it in transpose mode so it'll follow me around the piano keyboard. But that's it, end of the story, okay? One little button over here that says phase, and specifically you can actually offset the phase. 99% of the time, the phase isn't going to matter in terms of what it sounds like. Right, so there's all sorts of different phases. If I actually modify the phase while I'm holding the note down, that will matter a little bit in the sense that it'll click and kind of freak out a little bit. But just know that for right now, phase is not a big deal. We'll talk more about phase issues later on. It's not something you need to think about when you're designing patches when you're starting out. Okay, let's do the single sine wave oscillator. That's exciting. Let's go to the unison tab. All right, so I have one sine wave. What the unison tab will allow us to do inside of Absynth is basically duplicate that effect. So let's play a note. Now I'm going to play two copies of that same exact note, except that one is going to be about, a 20% of a semitone higher. In the case of a sine wave, you can actually just hear it phasing in and out. That's because they're coming in and out of phase. Again, we won't talk about this today. This isn't really the point of today's lecture. But we can do things like this, where I'm only holding one note down on the keyboard, but you can actually hear two different notes playing at the same time. You can hear they're about a perfect fifth apart. But what we really use this for more often is to have a number of voices that are all around the same part, around the same point, but maybe a little bit off. And usually you don't want to do it such that each voice is the exact same distance away from the other voices, because then you'll get actual beating issues. So instead of using the transpose tab, instead we can use this randomizer tab. This will randomize the distance for all of them. So now you can hear when I play a sine wave, it actually has like this hazy little bit of life to it. It sounds, it's not just a boring pure sine wave anymore. It's kind of fading in and fading out. It's got all these little fluctuations in it because there's really 8 of them that are all layered on top of each other, providing a really rich sine wave sound. And of course, we can take this to extremes. We can randomize much larger values. So this is going to randomize up to 8 notes within the space of an octave on the piano. Listen to this. This will start sounding a lot like Stockhausen very quickly. So I'm just playing individual tones, but every time I play, or individual notes I should say, but every note I play on the keyboard is actually generating 8 different pitches that are all randomized, so who knows what you're going to get. But then again, if you just want to make a bunch of noisy stuff like that, that's perfect, right? Exactly what the doctor ordered. Now, this unison tab is often more useful when we're using waveforms other than sine wave. Sine wave's a little dark. Let's try using square waves. These are much, much brighter. Maybe not use the randomizer so much. Whoops. Unison tab. And let's bring this back down to something more reasonable. Again, just a little. We want it just to be a little bit off. Not a bad sound. It's kind of fun. So this is a way to thicken your sound and actually make it, I'll say a little hazier is usually what it's going to come out to be, but it doesn't have to be necessarily, especially, if we're actually using real musical intervals. This is a way you could also just synthesize diminished chords, for instance. So if we were actually just to set this to 3, everything's going to sound like it's a horror movie, like a cheesy 1950s kind of. Is the guy going to get the girl? Is the train going to run them all over? Will they see tomorrow? right? You guys know what I'm talking about. So sequence tab, again, just a way to generate a whole bunch of notes, a whole bunch of frequencies just based off of one oscillator setting. All right, so that's single mode. That's mildly exciting. Let's try a new mode. Let's try double mode. Double mode is going to fade between two different waveforms, and we can actually adjust the fade amount. So let's load two waveforms. Let's actually keep the square wave. Whoops, just knocked over all my papers. Square wave. And how about, let's go to the mod tab. Oh, I guess we could use sine. And you see this balance tab right here? I'm dragging up and down. Listen to it as I drag. Is there a sine wave? So you can hear the balance is basically how much of the sine wave are we going to mix in versus the square wave. And that's about it. It's pretty simple. It just lets you use one oscillator as two. You might say, well, while I'm recording music, I don't want to actually move my mouse and do this. No problem. We can draw an envelope for that. If you remember the last video, went to the envelopes. We can say new envelope, oscillator A, and say A mod index and balance. And we can say, when this thing starts, we want it to be kind of like a square wave. And then it'll come all the way up to a sine wave. And then it'll come back down to a square wave. And then maybe it'll fade back up to a sine wave. So I'll play one note on the piano keyboard. You can hear that fade in and out. Yes, that ADSR has a few extra points in it. Might want to smooth it out maybe. We can make all sorts of shapes here. But you get the idea, so I can... Right, very simple, just crossfading between square waves and sine waves. That's pretty cool. Another mode, we're going to talk about FM in the next video, so I'm going to save that. FM is a pretty complicated topic. It's one of the most famous synthesizer techniques. If you know and are familiar with any 80s music, I'm sure you know the FM sound. But again, we'll save that for the next video. Ring mod, actually it's a lot easier to understand if you understand FM, so I guess I'll save that for the next video as well. Fractalize is a mode that's pretty unique to Absynth. I don't think I've seen fractal synthesis in a whole lot of other applications. Let's go back to the sine wave. I think it's easiest to hear with that. So I should just hear a sine wave right now. Well, no, I won't. All right, here's the sine wave. Remember what the sine wave sounds like? Let's just refresh your memory. Single mode, sine wave. Let's play a higher one. All right, A440, sine wave. Good, 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 good. Let's do fractalize. All right, so already you can tell it's a very different sound, and basically what I'm doing is I'm going to add smaller versions of itself within itself. Okay, so I got my paper open here. So here's the fractalized mode in Absynth, very quickly explained. If I have a sine wave, it's going to look like this, right? Push the speaker out and then push it back. All fractalize is going to do is take this shape and actually add it back in onto itself. So instead of looking like this, I will essentially superimpose another sine wave in here like that. So the new shape will look like that. That kind of, do you guys see if I, actually I could just, I guess, erase that. Something like this, right, where I'm just going to take that sine wave shape and superimpose it on top of itself. And there is a whole lot of diversity of sounds you can get with this, depending on how many of those do you actually put inside itself. You can just listen to it, but basically everything you do in this is going to make the sound brighter. It's going to add overtone content. It's going to add usually harmonically related overtones. So if I'm playing 440 hertz, it'll add more 880 and 1320 and 1760. It's just going to add more and more of that the more I do this fractal thing. So just listen as I add more and more of these. And again, we don't have to put it in the full amount. The displace, actually what it will do, whoops, bring back my dock, will actually determine where I'm adding that shape within itself. So if I were to displace it more, again, here's my sine wave. right? If I were to add it into itself, it might just go right at the beginning. Or if I were to displace it, it might actually go right in here. Right? So then my sound wave would now look something like that. Oh, that's not possible. You get the idea. Right? It's going to add the squiggle somewhere else in the sound. Okay. So here's your fractal mode. It's pretty cool. You know, I'll definitely give it that. But it's really just a way to add overtone content. You can get some really organy and like accordion kind of sounds. It's pretty cool. Okay, that's your quick introduction to fractalize. Sync, granular, we're not going to talk about. Sample, you can use this synthesizer as if it was a sampler. In other words, you can just click here, and Absynth already comes with a whole list of them, of basically pre-recorded sounds. So here we can load a choir, and we can just play our choir. There you go, I'm playing choir. And again, what I'm actually playing is I'm just telling, instead of using a shape to push your speakers in and out, it's actually just playing through a sound file. And whatever note I put in will determine how fast to play back that choir sound. So essentially it's working as a sampler. Come back later, I'll do some videos on samplers, and you'll see some advanced features of what we can do with this type of processing. But note that Absynth can do some basic sampling too, right there. We also have granular mode. All right, this is the last one I'm going to show you. I really don't want to talk about granular synthesis, man, I can barely say it, in this video, because I want to save that for when we talk about the new Cubase plugin, the Pad Shop, which I think is a pretty cool granular synthesizer. But the idea is this. Here's what you need to know about granular synthesis. Take any sound, and instead of playing it back from point A to point B, in other words, from the beginning to the end, take little tiny snippets of it and play it back kind of chaotically. So again, I'll use my little paper to demonstrate what's about to happen. If I have my sound, right, here's my squiggly sound wave. Instead of just playing it forward like as if time goes from left and right, we're going to play maybe this chunk, and then maybe this chunk, and maybe this chunk, and then maybe this chunk from here to here, and then here to here, and then we go over here and play that chunk, if you're doing this in a different color. Right, play this part, and then go back here and play this part, and play this part, and then play this part, and then maybe play this part. Again, do you see I'm just sort of playing it back randomly at random little intervals? Well, each of these is called a grain, each of these little parts that I'm playing back. And when you just add all the grains together, you're sort of re-synthesizing the original sound, and hence the granular synthesis. So we can use this granular technique on the choir sound. So here's my ah. And if you notice, it'll sound a little bit fuzzier than it did before. It's not as smooth compared to this. Here's the sample mode. Very smooth, sounds like one recording. Oops, nope, no, don't load the sample. If I go to granular, you can kind of hear it going, yeah, it's kind of doing one of those things. Again, it's very slight. But again, that's because it's not playing back through the whole sample left to right. It's sort of chopping it up and doing it piece by piece by piece. And there's a lot of these options here. We can actually adjust how big each grain is, and just how many grains there are. If I put it down to single grains, you can hear them chopped up very deliberately, right? So it's only going to play one copy of itself at a time. Here's 8 grains. And these are all sort of layered on top of each other, so again, it makes a continuous sound. Anyway, don't need to mess around a whole lot with granular synthesis in this plugin. I have some other plugins I would use whenever I do granular synthesis, so not my favorite one. Okay, so just to recap here, we have all these different ways we can make sound essentially from our oscillator. Single mode displays one thing. Double mode allows you to play 2 different waves and fade between the 2 of them. The modulator modes, again, we'll save for the next video. Fractalize will let you add overtones. Sample will just let you play audio recordings, audio samples. And granular will actually take samples and basically chop them up and then splice them back together. One last thing though before we go, I do want to point this out because I haven't done this yet. Do note that you have A, B, and C. You actually have 3 oscillators here. So we could add 3 different sounds together. I could have a choir ah on channel A. I could start channel B, and we could add a sawtooth wave. How about just a real one? We could transpose it down. Oops, 2 octaves below the choir. So this is going to be a little bit quieter. Maybe we'll add just a sine tone, 7, no, I'll do 19 semitones up. And you can balance between them. So if you want to hear a little less sawtooth and a little less sine wave, you can just turn down each of these channels like this. So I have all 3 of those sounds going whenever I play a single note. So this is a very crude version of additive synthesis. You're just taking multiple oscillators and summing them together. This is called additive synthesis. All right, so that should have been not too difficult to follow. I'll see you guys in the next video where we'll talk about frequency modulation, the very, very exciting world of frequency modulation and 80s music.